Yeah, the people who started it and one of the
Well, once again, I want to thank everybody for coming out on this nice February morning. Just as I said on the air a few minutes ago, I happened to bring up a website from a place up in Wyoming that I love to pack into in the summer months. It's a live picture of a thermometer and a snow meter stick. It looked like it was about 16 below zero and just right at a foot of snow on the ground. So this is what winter ought to be like. We'll just kind of keep this little secret to ourselves. And with things starting to warm up, it is time to think about pruning, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning. When I ask, first of all, how many of y'all, this is the first time you've been to one of our seminars? How many first-time attendees? How many of y'all, it's the first time you've been in the nursery? Okay, so most of y'all have been here, but again, the ground rules for the seminar are, there aren't any ground rules. If you have a question, please stick up your hand and ask, and if it's something I'm going to cover a little later, I'll put you off for a few minutes. If it's something appropriate to cover right then, I'll be happy to answer it. As always, those who have been to very many of our seminars know that we do play a little game, and that is, if you have a question that you really don't want to admit something that's occurring in your yard, you stick up your hand and you say, my neighbor couldn't come today, but they wanted me to ask. Now, we're going to know the truth, but if it makes you feel better, you feel free to ask whatever question you think your neighbor might want to have answered. But topic today is pruning. What should be pruned in the landscape, when to prune it, how much to prune it, a lot of different things to cover. And I want to start off by just a couple of general things, talking about what pruning does. When you prune a plant, what actually physiologically happens. Now, if you are pruning on dead tissue, come on in.
If there's too many in, then I'm getting claustrophobic. So I want to stay out here with the trees.
Oh, okay. Well, if you can't see, yeah, turn around, dummy, and show me that. Okay, if you're pruning on dead wood, whether it's just dead limbs, whether it's wood that is frozen back, whether it's wood like at the tip of a crepe myrtle or something where the seeds are, if you're pruning on dead wood, that's like cutting your hair or cutting your fingernails. The plant doesn't know that you're doing anything. This is a mallow hibiscus, perfectly normal for it to freeze back to ground level. And everything you see here is just dead wood. And the plant doesn't even know that we have done this. So dead tissue like that can be cut away anytime without any effect whatsoever on the plant. Same thing would be true of maybe you have some salvia coccinea that's frozen completely, or if you were in a colder area, maybe your plumbago froze back, or your indigo spires, or whatever else. Dead wood doesn't know that it's being pruned, so you can do it absolutely any time with no effect whatsoever on the plant. When you're pruning on live wood, imagine a stem coming up, imagine a stem of pittosporum or something like that. There is a constant flow of material, including a little hormone that makes buds break and begin to grow, that are constantly moving up the stem of the plant. When you cut that stem off, what happens is that hormone that causes the buds to break and sprout and begin to grow starts concentrating at the point that you made the cut. And as it concentrates, as the level of it builds up, that's what makes little buds begin to break and begin to grow. Now, when a plant first puts on new growth, that growth is not especially cold hardy. It is much more susceptible to freezing. Even, let's say, a boxwood, for instance. Boxwood will go to 10 below zero without damage. But the new tissue that comes out, even a light freeze, when those little leaves first appear, even 28 degrees can cause that new foliage to freeze. So it takes a little while for new growth to harden off. Why is this important? Well, we don't want to prune too early, because that'll put the plants, that'll make them put on a whole flush of growth. You know, we talked last week about pruning roses around Valentine's Day. Normally it takes about 2 weeks for that new flush of growth to come out. By 2 weeks from now, hopefully we're going to be beyond the danger of a really, really hard freeze. So this is one reason that we don't recommend doing a whole lot of pruning in the middle of the winter, because then if we have that typical January cold or warm spell, and it seems like this whole January was pretty warm, then your plants may start to resume growth too quickly, and if we get a hard freeze, it can freeze all that tissue back and the plant has to really start over. So timing is critical when we're actually pruning on live wood. But like I say, dead wood like this, just like cutting your hair, doesn't even know it's been cut, so you can do that anytime. Same thing is true of dead limbs in trees, dead canes and roses, or anything else. You can prune that material out anytime you see it show up.
Once you prune one that heavily, then is it best to mulch it real heavily and feed it?
It depends on the plant. If it is a plant which is not especially cold hardy, hopefully you mulched it last fall, because again, if you haven't lived here for 20 years, you don't know how cold it can get. But I see some people here, like the Rolands and all, that I know have lived here forever, and you remember 1983 when it went to 5 degrees and everything froze. So something that's really cold sensitive, mulch those in the fall so it never gets a chance to freeze any lower than the level of the mulch. But this late in the season, probably not going to gain a whole lot by mulching. Okay, timing on when to prune different things. Oh, back one more thing about taking dead wood out. Again, you can do it any time. We're going to talk a little bit about the special things we have to do for red oaks and live oaks to prevent oak wilt, because that is introduced by insects through pruning wounds. But in most cases, I don't recommend pruning paint for anything except live oaks and red oaks. And there, we're not helping the wounds heal. All we're doing is keeping the bugs out so that those wounds can seal over and you don't worry about getting oak wilt started. But in general, pruning paint actually slows down healing rather than speeds it up. A lot of great marketing has been done by people that make pruning paint, but you don't want to use it on the great majority of things because, like I say, in most cases, it doesn't help the tree heal, doesn't help the shrub heal. So put the pruning paint away unless you're pruning on red oaks or live oaks, in which case the pruning paint or some other sealer is really important. But we'll talk about oak wilt a little bit later. Yes, sir?
What about using the glue to cover up a cut when you're roasting?
If you're pruning in really warm weather, then a lot of times they will recommend coating the point that you cut, and the reason for that is a little insect called the stem cane borer. It's a little moth that comes in, lays the egg in the end of the cut, and then this little insect will hollow its way down through, the plant. Only seems to be a problem in the hot months of the year, and quite honestly, in organic gardens, I've never seen a rose cane borer. So, people that are still using the chemical rose foods and the systemic poisons and all that sort of stuff, maybe it's a good idea, but I've never found it necessary. The other thing is that nowadays we're growing so many roses on their own roots that have relatively thin stems, you're never going to get a cane borer in stems that are this size. The only place you're going to get cane borers is in your grafted roses that produce, that real heavy cane that's really big around. Yeah, if you're in the Rose Society, you're going to cut these things back to very heavy wood, you're trying to produce award-winning blooms, probably be a good idea to seal those wounds over. I think most people just use nail polish or something like that. Okay, so it's important to know when to prune, and want to kind of divide plants into 3 categories as to when you prune them. A lot of spring flowering plants, including Indian hawthorn, spirea, flowering quince, a lot of spring flowering vines like wisteria, and most flowering trees like redbuds, all trees like this, or all plants like this, bloom on wood that grew last fall. So if we prune too early in the year, we're cutting away those buds before they can develop and give us the flowers. So plants that bloom in early spring, for the most part, let them bloom first and then do your pruning afterwards. Indian hawthorn, spirea, things like that, let them put on that heavy flush of flowers and then prune afterwards. That's probably going to be sometime around the middle of April, maybe even be as late as the 1st of May. Plants which bloom in the summer tend to bloom on new wood. We're talking about crepe myrtles, we're talking about altheas, we're talking about most of the plants that bloom later in the year. Plants that bloom in the summer and plants that are grown primarily for their foliage, like Pittosporum or Viburnum or most of these other plants, we want to prune them just before new growth begins in the spring, which is typically late February. Now, a few plants